This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Four Sigmatic. Join the mushroom coffee revolution at foursigmatic.com/Spartan.
Welcome to Spartan Up Podcast. We've got an awesome one today. Luis Escobar. I'm pumped.
Yeah, Luis Escobar. This guy is an incredible ultra runner, unbelievable.
I think he was born to run.
Well, you know what? That's actually where he became very well known. Is the Born to Run, the race in 2006 in the Copper Canyon, Mexico, the Tarahumara Indians. He really was a driving force behind all that. But he's become a real driving force in the running community. And the cool thing, we interviewed him in Tahoe, where he came to see what Spartan Race was all about, and really saw some amazing synergies with that in the running community. So we're gonna learn about that.
I'm pumped. Let's do it.
We are here at the Spartan Race World Championships in absolutely gorgeous Squaw Valley, Lake Tahoe. I'm with Luis Escobar, and we're going to get into who you are in a minute, but you're not unfamiliar with those hills right behind us.
No, I've had some of the best and the worst days of my life in those mountains right back there. Yeah, I've been here before.
Cool. So the first time I ever heard of you, I was reading the book Born to Run, and you were this mythical, larger-than-life figure like everyone in the book was.
And then you met me and you're disappointed.
Not at all.
What happened?
No, I feel very, very fortunate to have met you and other people in that world.
Yeah.
And, our podcast that we do, it's about grit and resilience and people finding their path and the challenges they come up against. And so I just know that your experiences, your own experiences and the experience you've shared with people, you've got to deal with a lot of ups and downs and things along the way. So the book was Born to Run.
That's right.
So tell me how that first came about, how you first got involved with that whole situation.
So the book Born to Run was inspired by a trip down to the Copper Canyons in 2006. That's northern Mexico, the state of Chihuahua. And so my friend Scott Jurek had been invited by Christopher McDougall, who was writing an article for Men's Health magazine about endurance. And so Scott was part of that article. Scott contacted me and said, I got this incredible opportunity to go to Mexico and run with the Tarahumara Indians. Do you want to go? Like, yeah, absolutely, I want to go. So I invited myself onto this trip, basically, and it was wonderful. The group of 6 or 7 of us went down there, and we were there for a couple of weeks, and we toured around. We did a lot of hiking, running, photography. I got to meet these Tarahumara Indians who had never really been photographed seriously before, and just a wonderful opportunity. And to meet McDougall and Ted McDonald and all the characters from the book was just great. And that was years ago, and it continues now.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? It's a movement that just keeps spiraling and spiraling.
Yep.
And so that's not your only exposure to racing, obviously. I mean, you've done Western States here a few times.
Right, yeah.
You just ran a big race 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, it's about 2 weeks ago, the Tahoe 200. An incredible event. It starts here at Homewood, not too far from where we are now, and it does a big chunk of the Tahoe Rim Trail and the Rubicon Trail and several others. It was my first attempt at 200 miles continuous, and it was really something. It was a handful. I learned a lot. 92 hours was my time, so almost 4 days.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. So how'd you get started? How'd you get started with running in the first place, and especially running ultra distance?
I discovered running through tennis, actually. I was playing a lot of tennis when I was young, and I thought that I would run as a way to get in shape to be a better tennis player. And it didn't take me long to discover that I'm really not a very good tennis player, but I could run. I couldn't run fast, but I could run far. Yep. And then I just started finding other people that were like that. And in 1990, I was introduced to the Santa Barbara 9 Trails, which is a 35-mile race. I did that, and I was hooked. And I just knew that this is for me.
Yeah,
long and slow. That's what I like.
And speaking of that world and your place in that world, you're probably even better known as a photographer than as a runner.
Yeah, so I'm a photographer, and sometimes I'm a photographer that runs. Sometimes I'm a runner who's a photographer, but ultimately both of those worlds come together sometimes, and it's wonderful to be able to do what I'm passionate about, and then document what I'm passionate about. Mm-hmm. It's great, and yeah.
And the pictures that I've seen of yours, I mean, I'm sure you have all kinds of different methods, but you're a master of shadow and a master of light. And it seems like there's a real grit to the pictures that I've seen. And like you capture the emotion on people's faces, and sometimes it's the suffering, sometimes it's, there's stories there.
Right.
What is it that led to that?
Well, I'm an actually trained photographer, and that's my occupation. Mm-hmm. And then I enjoy running. So if I can put the two of those things together and tell a story. That's what it's about. I hope that when people see my running photography, that when I'm there, when I'm on the top of this mountain photographing Western States 100, I've been up there as a runner, and I know what it feels like. I know how it smells, how it tastes. I know what it's like. And so I'm hoping that through my photography, I can communicate that as well. So I hope when people look at an image, they read all of that. It's not just a pretty picture, but hopefully they're seeing it, smelling it, tasting it, just as if they were there. That's always my goal when I have a camera in my hand.
That's awesome. And when you talk about the having shared that experience yourself, when you're out running 100 miles, 200 miles now, or when you're running, in the race in Copper Canyon, there is a certain amount of suffering involved, isn't there?
Sure. I mean, there's moments of greatness where you're feeling wonderful and nothing can go wrong, and then there's other times when you're literally on the ground, laying in the dirt, and all the emotions and physical feelings between those two. It happens there.
And as you mentioned about Scott, you're a good friend of yours, and I know he paced you at that race. And there's the famous story of him at Badwater when he thought he was going to die, and they had to cool his temperature down in a bathtub full of ice or an ice chest. Yeah. And so when you're out on the trail, and whether it's you suffering or someone else suffering, what is it that allows people in this community to dig in and keep going? Because so many people don't even put themselves in that position in the first place, and those who do would never imagine coming through it.
Yeah. During the Tahoe 200 just a couple weeks ago, I said, the secret is there is no secret. Just keep moving. And that's kind of true. What you mentioned with Scott, and I've seen this with many other champions, a real champion, when you're down, when you're done, when it's over, you can't go any further. You've exhausted yourself mentally, physically. You're at the end, and you're literally laying on the ground. That's the moment. That's the moment. That's when a champion is made. When you say, there's only one way to go, and that's up. I'm as low as I can be. And when you get up, when you make that decision to get up and continue forward, that's when the magic happens. And that's when you really find out who you are and what you're about.
That's incredible. That's a very perfect spot to take a quick break. We're going to expand on that when we come back.
All right, let's do it.
I hope you're not sitting still while you listen. If you are, you better get a burpee break in.
So we were talking about suffering. We're talking about that a champion's made when they can really get as low as you can get and realize that it's time to step up and get going. Tell me about some times in your career, and it may be even in your life. It might be running. It might just be other things. But when you've been there, when you've been like, how do I keep going?
Well, first of all, suffering's not the point of the whole thing. But suffering is sometimes a component of it. And, any distance runner has been in the situation where you're done. You're completely exhausted, and there's no room for anything else. I've had many of those opportunities, and it's a wonderful place to be. Really, there's only one way to get to that spot. You can't buy that. You can't read that. You have to go and do it. And when you get to that moment, like I said before, it's when you stand up, make the decision to continue forward, is when you really find out what you're about.
Yeah. And like you say, I mean, it's not just about suffering. It's about succeeding and about striving and all those things too. So I'm curious too. Like I'm a big fan of saying yes to things and diving into experiences. And you said to me when we were talking earlier, and I asked you if you'd come on the podcast. I really appreciate you doing it. But you said that that whole experience, the Born to Run experience, started out as a bunch of friends decided to go for a cool run. And then you'd never would have imagined all the things that grew out of it. Right. So what other times in your life, or even expand on that one, just in terms of, has just being willing to put yourself out there been the difference?
Well, just like what you said, saying yes is a powerful thing. And having an open mind and being positive and being willing to put yourself in situations that maybe other folks are not willing to put themselves into. Going to Mexico at that time in 2006 was a risky situation. We weren't sure where we were going. We weren't sure exactly who were we meeting, and there was no real structure to it. And so, yes, I guess some people would look at that with fear or reservation and not want to go. But, man, every now and then you just have to say, yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this happen. And you succeed. And, standing here, I've started the Western States 100 many times. I'm an 8-time finisher, and I'm standing right down there. And you have to just say, these mountains are big. And I'm small, but there's nothing bigger than my desire to complete this thing. I'm going to start here in Squaw, and I'm going to finish in Auburn, and there's nothing that's going to get in my way. And obstacles are what you see when you take your eyes off of the goal.
Yep.
Look forward, watch the goal, and don't give up, no matter what happens. There's no secret. The secret is there is no secret.
I like that.
Keep going.
I want to ask you another question too about so we choose our difficulties, right? Like we choose to do ultramarathons, we choose to do Spartan race, we choose to do these things.
Yeah.
You've gotten to know some people very well in a community where they didn't necessarily choose those challenges. I think about the Tarahumara in Copper Canyon, and I was down in Eureka in 2015, and just it's a hard life, and I don't mean it's a bad life, but I mean they run because they have to run to get back and forth, and so. What have you learned from those people?
Well, those people in Mexico, the Tarahumara in the Copper Canyons, their running is not recreational. They're not running for T-shirts or buckles or trophies. They're running that's how they survive. It's part of their culture. So they're in a completely different program, and it's just what they've done for generations. But talking about people that maybe don't choose their situation, I want to talk about this nonprofit that I mentioned before.
Absolutely.
And it's called Back on My Feet, and it's a national nonprofit, and they work with homeless people that don't necessarily choose their situation, but they're in this situation. They're homeless and they're on the street. And this group, Back on My Feet, their motto is they combat homelessness through the power of running. And they use running to help these folks to get them onto a schedule, get them accountable for something. They come to a run 3 days a week, and they show up and they do the work. And they're not runners; they're homeless people.
Yeah, sure.
And they become runners, and after they become a runner, they get back into society and become a contributing person to themselves and their family. So I don't want to talk about this whole thing being that, but it's something that's a very, very interesting group.
You don't have to apologize.
Running.
You don't have to apologize for that at all. I want to actually talk more about that.
Yeah.
So now I think you mentioned before about that you've run with a homeless person in the marathon. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, New York City. So last year I volunteered to help raise a little bit of money and then go back to New York City and run the marathon. And running street marathons is really not my thing, but it was awesome, to be in a big race with I don't know how many 40,000 people and running through all the boroughs in New York. I'm used to running in the mountains, so it was a completely different environment for me. But even cooler, I got to pace this guy. His name is Dale, and he's a homeless guy, and he's working with Back on My Feet, or they're working with him. And he got to the point where he could actually complete a marathon. He came literally from the streets. He wanted to run a 4-hour marathon, and we did it together. And
That's
to be
awesome.
next to that guy and watch it happen, it was super cool.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love that it's not just about you, and I'm not saying that it is for all runners at all, but the runners that I appreciate the most are the ones who found a way to make it about something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. And I wanted to hear one other thing. You've just come back from my homeland, Canada, just yesterday, and you had a really cool experience it's funny when you're describing where you were, and I didn't know any of the cities, and you said it's near Yellowknife. I said, oh my God, you're way north.
Yeah.
So you're up in a very remote community there too.
Yeah, and they're not cities; they're just communities, right? So it's the Aboriginal people. The community I was in was Delaney, which is on the Great Bear Lake, way north in the Northwestern Territories, way up there, and that they're an interesting group of folks too. I didn't see any running, but I see people living off of the land and definitely struggling day to day to survive in a real harsh environment. But they're exactly where they want to be, and don't feel sorry for them. They're not poor. They're living the life that they've lived for centuries, literally eating moose and caribou and fishing for living, for survival.
And it is all about perspective, though, right? Because so many people think that's a hard life, and it's not hard at all.
Same with the Tarahumara. You look at these folks, and people from here, we go down there and think, oh, these poor guys, they don't have cars, they don't have TVs, they don't have internet. And you know what else? They don't have mortgages, they don't have heart disease, they don't have, there's a lot of things. They're not poor. They're not rich and they're not poor, but they're very happy.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate that so much, man. Hey, I want to ask you two things. If people want to find out more about the charity, remind me the name again?
Yeah, Back on My Feet.
Back on My Feet. Where do they find out about that?
Well, I'm just Google backonmyfeet.org. I'm sure it is. There's chapters all over the country. It's a really cool thing. If you want to get involved in something great, it means a lot to me, and I think it would mean a lot to you too. Check it out, and you don't have to be a great distance runner. Just anybody. You can go and help these folks out, or donate a little bit of money, or go spend some time with them. That's probably even more important. Cool. Back on My Feet.
And I also want to let people know where they can find your photography.
So, my photography, and I put on a couple of the races. So,
that's right, too.
So
yeah.
if you want to come to a race in California in Santa Barbara County, or if you want to check out some photography or just you want to talk with me, whatever, all we do is run.com.
All we do is run.com.
You can remember that. All we do is run.
Very cool. Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
Really
for having
appreciate
me.
you being here. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks.
How awesome was that? You guys all want to go run a couple hundred miles?
Or 200.
Yeah. 200
race you.
miles.
A couple hundred.
Yeah, a couple hundred. Oh, you screwed me up.
Tell us about that mountain shot.
Yeah. So in the background of that shot is one of the main peaks in the Western States.
Just
100.
a little hill.
Yeah, like one of the original 100-mile run. It runs right through there. There's a plaque there. Lewis has done that race several times.
Now, you met him in the back of a pickup truck in Nicaragua,
Yeah.
right?
So the first time I met Lewis in person was in the back of a pickup truck in Nicaragua, down an ultra run down there, and somebody says this is Lewis Escobar, and I'm thinking that name's familiar.
Yeah, well, Escobar, and you're in South America.
We started it.
But of course, it was from the book Born to Run, and he was one of the real driving forces who, Caballo Blanco and Scott Jurek and pulling all that together. But the cool thing is he has become very, very good friends with some of the great runners from the Tarahumara and brought them up to other races in North America and maintained that relationship. But his place in the ultra world, I mean, he's a humble guy, and he says, what did he say? He said, I'm not fast, I can just run for a long time. He's a good runner. He knows many great runners, but he's got some of the most iconic photographs, not just in running. He's a great photographer in general, but he's so well known in the running community for those incredible photographs he takes. But he talks.
He took photos for us that were incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because that one of your race directors, Josue, is very good friends with him, and he invited him because he knows he lives nearby. He said, "Hey, you got to come see what we're doing here in Tahoe."
Sure.
And Luis is like, "Yeah, cool. I'll come over and check it out." He was blown away, by the way. Sorry to cut you off, but he was blown away by Spartan Race.
Oh, good.
I think there's some runners because they're purists.
don't get it.
They don't get it, right? They think, well, it's not running.
Look, I resisted it for a long time, and then we finally took the plunge. And you've been around all this stuff. You've been around some serious stuff in the military. You've been around the woods, and
yeah.
Or the block.
it's awesome when you get out there and there's 10,000 people on the side of a mountain and the obstacles and.
When you look at just talking about that running community, like some of the runners like Charlie Engle, who like
Yeah.
I see Charlie's posting all the time about Spartan Race now.
Now
Like,
they're at every race.
people are
I
so
get it.
excited,
They
right?
get pumped.
Yeah.
But when he came over, he was coming to his own backyard. Basically, he's run there a million times. Really, really impressed by the race. And what were you going to say, Tim? I cut you right off.
No, I was just I was curious, and I forgive me if it was covered in the interview. So when he's running, does he take photos?
No,
or
no.
Is he's either running or he's
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
he's
Yeah. He gets brought to a
photographing.
lot of races to cover
Photography.
the race, but he's also done some incredible portraits. Like his use of light is amazing.
And they said
especially the grit
light and shadow.
this. Yeah, exactly.
You know what that fancy word is from the art history background?
I don't know.
Chiaroscuro. That means light and shadow.
that brings up a memory.
Fantastic.
Do you?
Well,
That was on a scooter.
You know,
once.
we talk a
Sure.
lot about grit, and that's a big part of what the podcast is about. And he's very good at catching grit
That
and
moment.
capturing grit, and he's seen gritty situations. You know, when you talk about people doing these incredibly long runs and digging in, and there's some great stories. Like Scott Jurek, I'm sure you've heard the story about in Badwater, where he actually had to lay down in a chest freezer full of ice to bring his body core temperature down.
Yeah.
And then went out and finished the race and won the race.
Yeah.
Is that
Where do you sign up? I mean,
well, Joe's got a great friend, Lisa Batchin Smith,
Yeah.
who is one of the most illustrious Badwater finishers in terms of the most finishes. But didn't she do a quad, bottom to
She
top
did a
to
quad,
bottom to top
yeah.
to bottom?
But Marshall Ulrich has done more.
Okay.
Bottom to tops, solo carrying a wagon full of water and food.
Unbelievable, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the really neat thing about this,
Talking about 500-600 miles.
yeah, no, I get it.
well, not only that, it's 135 miles, but it's
in
from,
and then you
100
got
in-
elevation.
in 135 degree heat.
Yeah,
it's,
well,
from, it's from the
elevation.
bottom of
Yeah.
Death Valley to the top of Mount Whitney.
Right,
Yeah.
and so elevation and weather.
Yeah, and just
It's like
so
doing
so
a
hot,
military crawl
so,
on
so hot.
Oregon
It's one of the things
Trail.
it's famous for, that the runners have to run basically single file so that they
Oh,
can
on the
run
white line.
on the white
I've
strip.
heard
I was
that.
gonna say, you've
my
talked-
shoes, my
Shoes
shoes
melt.
melted, my shirt melted, but that wasn't the most of it. The most of it was my wife and her father, my father-in-law, were in a minivan as part of the
The
support crew.
tires melted?
They have to drive alongside you in the front and the back. They've got to make sure the blinkers are on. They get to feed you and support you every 2-3 miles. They became so delusional because of the heat, because they were in an air-conditioned car, and then that I looked over at one point, and neither of them were driving the van. They were in the back making sandwiches. There was nobody, and it was just, it was like, I thought I was seeing things. And they went off into hit a cactus or something.
But some that's pretty neat that I think sometimes we take for granted because we're around these people. People like Luis and people like Lisa and people who we talked about Ian Adamson and the race you did in the BVI, and these are incredible feats. And it's we talk.
They do have incredible feet.
I would still argue running a business is harder.
Sure.
But
well, I think, or at least it just doesn't feel like it ever ends. Maybe
it never ends. And Elon Musk recently said it's like chewing glass and looking to the abyss all day, every day. And I would say he's missing one part. There are people throwing knives at you while that's happening.
Sure.
And so, anyway,
anybody have a knife?
the only thing harder than that is
doing a podcast.
So
After a root canal.
Now in the hierarchy, we have running 500 miles. Running a business, and if you finally conceded that giving birth to a child might be harder.
That was what I was thinking.
I'm the one who has that distinct pleasure.
That debate still continues?
Still continues.
Well, you know what? I'm just thinking about some of the things we've done before, and you interviewed, I've just gone blank on her name, Rose Wetzel.
Yeah.
You interviewed Rose Wetzel giving birth.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have had Luis taking black and white photographs of her face and catching the grid of that. Would be pretty amazing.
But that's what I was going to ask you also. You talk about he captures these moments, right? But when he was talking, he talked about that champions were born in crisis or made in crisis, one or the other there. But so I guess he is good at, from what you're saying, capturing that moment where it's make or break.
Yeah.
Like when you're getting ready to break, and you decide you can power through it.
And we talk a lot about grinding through. And Joe, you've said that the one common thread among the hundreds of people we've interviewed is that they didn't quit. And almost everybody at some point in anything great, there's going to come a moment where you could have quit. And in that moment where it's just and like you say, champions are born out of crisis. I might be repeating myself in some of the things I've said in earlier podcasts too, but crisis and struggle and conflict and resolution and redemption, that's what makes life interesting.
We're never going to talk at the end of our lives about sitting on the couch
when things were easy.
We're always going to talk about tough
and we're
times.
never going to talk about
we're
never going to talk about the life at all of the person who played it safe every time, got the simple job, got the simple pension, got the simple retirement. You go to pay to watch Liam Neeson or Jamie Lee Curtis or whoever struggle and fight and grind through and come out the other end. And
Jamie Lee Curtis.
There you go. I was trying
Halloween or
exactly.
That said, grind through the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, no, absolutely. So
can I just add one seedy thing about the Tarahumara?
One seedy thing?
Yeah.
Quickly.
Very seedy.
The Tarahumara in the Sierra Madres, they had lost a lot of their indigenous landrace seed varieties that my friends had been stewarding. Talk about an endurance race is seeds that have been kept for thousands of years. And they were actually able to repatriate them back to the Tarahumara. And now those gritty seeds continue and survive on. That's an important thing to know.
That is
with
important.
With
So
that, now you guys can go to Spartan.com/podcast and subscribe on iTunes, YouTunes, or wherever you watch your podcast, and run 200 miles and save some seeds.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Four Sigmatic. Join the Mushroom Coffee Revolution at foursigmatic.com/Spartan.
Thank you for watching another epic story of success. If you like our message, please share Spartan Up with your friends and subscribe on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you catch our show, maybe in the woods. Spartan Up is brought to you by Spartan Race. To find a race near you, visit Spartan.com.